Let me ask you this. Have you ever been in a conversation with somebody and you just feel completely connected? It's like you feel a sense of synchronicity between you and that other person. It's like they completely get you, almost like they're reading your mind. The chances are that person that you were having a conversation with was a very good listener. Now we've all heard the advice where they say we should be listening more than we're speaking. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth and we should be using them in that proportion. While great advice, it's missing a lot of the really important ingredients when it comes to being a good listener. You see, if you just follow this piece of advice, you might sit opposite somebody and you're listening to them, but while you're listening to them, you've got 0 facial expressions. You're almost glazed over in your eyes as you're listening to them. Even though you're hearing all the words that they're saying, you're just not giving anything away. Now, while you could argue that you are listening, the chances are you look like a psychopath. You see, listening isn't just about using your ears and hearing the words. There are lots of little moving parts when it comes to listening. Now, being a great listener, being an active listener, is something that is part of charismatic communication. Anybody that you have ever met that's very charismatic, that you consider to be a great communicator, is really good at listening. I speak to a lot of people and I coach a lot of people who say that they really struggle with small talk. And here's the thing, one of the most important skills when it comes to small talk and having conversations is to be a much better listener, to get the other person talking and to be able to actively listen to them. And it's a skill which, while it's a skill that we need to develop as charismatic communicators, it's something that needs to become part of who we are. It needs to be a characteristic of us, not something that we do in a conversation, something that happens automatically because we've trained it so much. It's just what we do. Let me share a little story with you, and then I'm going to give you some little tips around how we can develop our listening skills. So whenever I fly into a different city to do an event, I'll fly in, I'll land, I'll then jump in an Uber and then go to whatever the venue is. And I use this opportunity in the Ubers to train some of the skills myself so that I keep myself constantly, I suppose, fresh. I keep my communication muscle nice and active, even in those small talk situations. So I'll jump into an Uber, I'll get the conversation started, and one of the things that I like to do is to see how much information I can get from the Uber driver by getting them to talk, and then I will actively listen and then use different techniques to get them to give me more information and share some more about themselves. But here's what I want you to get from this. I once landed into Sydney, and to get from Sydney to the venue, it was probably about a 35-40 minute drive. So I jumped into the Uber, started my usual conversation starters that I use whenever I get into an Uber, and the driver started talking to me. And he started to reveal some information about himself. I then used some techniques to get some more information out of the driver. Now, over the space of that period of time, I found out quite a lot about this person. I found out whereabouts they had emigrated from. I found out that before they emigrated, they got shot a couple of times, which I was not expecting. Also found out a few of the things that's happened in the back of his Uber, which cannot be shared on this video. However, in that sort of 40-minute journey, I would say that I spoke for maybe somewhere between 5 and 8 minutes of the time while I was in that car. So I didn't speak very much. A lot of it was me initially asking the questions and then just using little techniques to get that person to keep talking. But when we got to the venue, the Uber driver pulled up and we're about to get out the car, but had a really good conversation. I'd done a really good job of listening. And he said to me, as I got out, he said, "You are one of the wisest people that I have ever met." And I didn't even really say anything. All I had done was listen to him. So that is the power of being a very good listener. It allows you to really connect with another person. It allows the other person to talk about their favorite subject, which is themselves. And it builds this real sense of trust between you and the other person. So let's dive into a few tips. Let's dive into a few tips now that can help you become a better listener. With all of the videos that I share, it's about taking one of these things, starting to practice it, make it part of who you are, and then develop the next one. So you might want to come back to this video to listen to them. I'm going to give you 5 things in this video. And the first one is really just about being present when we are in the conversation. Now you think, well, that's obvious. Well, I've heard that a million times before. But I want you to think, are you ever actually really present in that conversation. When I get up on stage to speak, for example, if I was thinking about what had happened earlier on that morning or what I'm going to be doing once I leave the stage and go off, I wouldn't be present up there with the audience. I'm really focused upon that moment in time that I am having with the audience. So I want you to just start to just be aware of this when you're in conversations. After the conversation's finished, just sort of think to yourself, was I thinking about stuff that had happened that morning? Was I thinking about stuff that I had to do after the conversation? And even during the conversation, if you find your mind starting to wander about things that you have done or things that you have to do, then just check back in with yourself and just make yourself really present and back in the moment. Now, another instance where this can also happen is when the person that you are talking to is speaking, and then all of a sudden you think, oh, I want to say this thing. It can slip you out of being present because you're so focused on you wanting to be able to say something that you stop listening to what they're saying. So just be really aware when you are in conversations that you are making sure that you are staying present in the moment and listening to the person. Second thing on the list is about reflecting and clarifying what that person is saying. So to really summarize this and make it simple, you're paraphrasing back what the person has said to you. You might repeat the last few words of their sentence. You're going to use some of the words that they've used in their sentence. So if someone says, I had an amazing time at the weekend, we went out for a lovely walk up in the hills, you can say, oh wow, that sounds amazing that you went up for a walk up in the hills. So you're just reflecting and clarifying. You're not saying back the whole sentence, you're just saying back a few of the words or the theme of whatever it is that they had just said. What this does is it shows the other person that you've listened. If you've heard something and maybe you're in a situation where it's a bit more important that you remember the information, then you might want to say, just so that I'm on the same page as you, and I just want to clarify to make sure that I understand exactly what you've said. It sounds to me like you've said A, B, and C. So that would be more in a professional setting where maybe you're talking about a plan moving forwards. So reflect and clarify. That is the second thing. The third thing is about waiting before you speak. All too often, the second somebody stops talking, we then want to jump in with our piece of information. I'm going to encourage you to just pause for a couple of beats before you speak. What this does is it gives you time to process what you're going to say. Also, it shows the other person that you have genuinely taken on the words that they've been saying, because it's like pausing for a thought before you give your opinion or before you give your side of the story. It makes you a much more intentional listener, much more intentional conversationalist. Now, the fourth thing is about using engaged body language. So we need to make sure that we are showing the other person non-verbally that we are listening to them. So we want our torso and our body pointing towards the other person. Ideally, we want to be leaning in slightly to show that we're interested. But we just want to make sure that our body language, it is engaged. It's not that our feet are pointing off in the other direction. Even now, if I was to present the video to you, it would feel like I'm about to walk off of the camera. We need to make sure that we stay present, that we stay engaged, and that our body language is showing this. And then the fifth and the final thing is about your facial expressions. Going back to what I said at the beginning about if you have a stoic face, you're going to look a bit like a psychopath. We are looking at other people's faces. When we're in communication with another person, we're looking at the other person's face to look for facial recognition, that they're getting the message. And we get this like raised eyebrows, like a surprised look on the face, maybe a smile on the face, maybe confused if they're talking about something that they found confusing. They're looking for us to mirror the emotions of what we're hearing. So we need to make sure that we're engaging our face. Now, this doesn't mean start being faking it. Oh, wow, and raising your eyebrows up at every single thing that they say. But it's about genuinely listening to that person and allowing your face to do what it needs to do. Allowing your face to show signs of worry if they're worried, to show signs of joy if they're showing joy, to show signs of surprise if they're surprised about something. This non-verbally tells the other person that we are listening. They're going to see it. It's going to encourage them to talk even more because they're going to go, yep, they're getting the message. Really interesting little tidbit here for you. And that is that because our brains are hardwired to survive, most of us will default to seeing the survival side of things. So our brains go negative. And when we are in conversation with somebody else, or when we're in a group of people and we see somebody who has a zero emotion across their face, So not even a negative face, but just no emotion on their face. So a neutral face, that's probably a better way of saying it. A neutral face. Our mind, our brains will default to seeing it as negative. So if you're in a conversation with somebody and your default facial expression is one that is very neutral, that person is going to feel like they're not connected with you during that conversation. So I've probably gone a little bit too much here about facial expressions, but they're a really important part of our communication skills. So there are 5 things. The first one is to be present. The second one was reflect and clarify. The third one was about pausing before you speak. The fourth one was make sure that your body language is engaged. And the fifth one was make sure that you use your facial expressions. Just those 5 things. If you start to do those and make them part of who you are, part of how you communicate on a daily basis, you're going to become a much better listener. People are going to feel so much more connected to you, and you're going to be a lot more charismatic as a communicator. So I hope this video has been really useful for you. I'd love to know your comments below if you've got a little tip on how to be a better listener. But otherwise, I will see you in the next video. Until then, toodle pip.